Hello and welcome back to another episode of the War Report. We got a lot to deal with today. Starting with some older news, Ruth Bader Ginsburg is no more. Now, my personal speculation is that they just announced she was no longer alive last week, last like week and a half ago, because I suspect she's probably been dead for a lot longer than that, probably towards the beginning of the year. We all probably remember Fox News putting up their fake, not their fake, but accidentally showing the R.I.P. Ruth Bader Ginsburg thing back in like February. So, you know, the conspiratorial side of me says, okay, yeah, she's been dead for a while, and they dropped this right before the election in order to, of course, swing it probably towards Biden. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a stalwart of the left wing, politically, culturally, etc. Which, again, when it comes to the Supreme Court, it's going to be a lot of cultural issues rather than actual substantive policy. And again, they get the final say on pretty much every cultural issue, which is one of the big problems with why uh, some of Trump's justices, quote unquote, betrayed him back in the summer with some of those issues. And it looks like we are facing the battle for a nomination, and the question is, will Trump get this new woman through who's allegedly this massive conservative? But I have my skepticism about her. Or will the left manage to push it back like how the Republicans did in the lead up to the 2016 election? So this is going to be the battleground for the next month. It's the main topic for the presidential debate, which is tomorrow. By the time you listen to this, you'll probably be a few hours before that. And then we're going to make a show covering that. But yeah, Ginsburg is dead. The seat is up for grabs, and this is just another can of fuel on the fire in an already very divided country.
Yes, it is. But it's the normal outrage. Liberals sort of have their own kind of fantasy opposition. We've witnessed 4 years of literally being under Hitler and all of that. And every time there's a new Supreme Justice, anytime there's a Republican running for the president's office, it's literally 1933 and so on and so on and so on. It's their flip switch, right? That's how they react, and in a way, they have to react that way because it would be demoralizing for them if they admitted that essentially they've won. They may not have gotten everything, but they got the majority of everything. All we have to witness is, the last ruling on trans rights in the workplace, a 6-3 victory. I believe Kavanaugh now is something of a liberal judge.
Yeah, wait, it was actually Gorsuch who was Scalia's replacement. Scalia was this conservative stalwart
Oh,
who
sorry.
voted for it, whereas I think Kavanaugh actually wrote the dissenting opinion. So, but again, Kavanaugh, like his first ruling after the whole scandal with the Blasey Ford woman in front of Congress and the absolute circus that was, his first ruling was not to hear a case about Planned Parenthood. So that's, but again, like there's several examples you can point to the point where like, oh yeah, they're center right on cultural issues at best, if not outrighting siding with liberals.
Yeah, and this idea also of, that you have, especially in the Twitter sphere, that both the sort of the left liberals and the trans agreeing for the wrong reasons, that somehow this is going to get rid of abortion in America. It's just utter nonsense. It's sad to see it. Like, sure, it's fun to ridicule libs when they think that is the case, right? Of course, you want to trigger them and make them believe that it is actually going to happen. But I would argue that most of them are aware it won't happen, right? So, I mean, I think, let's say a journalist who writes some kind of panic article, they know what they're doing. This is really about firing up the base, making a panic out of nothing, basically selective review of history that doesn't bear anything on the history of the U.S. in the last 50 years. So they'll do those sorts of things, and it's basically just to fire up the base. It's highly political. Um, yeah, so that's my takeaway on this. There's even been pieces where conservative judges have talked about keeping the balance of the court. So we know how this is going to drift. It's going to drift in a liberal leftward direction. I'm not even sure this is going to put any brakes on anything, or any speed bumps.
Yeah, actually, the biggest criticism I've heard of Trump's nomination, the Barrett woman, is her position on immigration is more on the leftward side, and of course she has the two adopted children from whatever country it
Yeah,
is. But yeah, so that's one of the primary concerns I've heard from people on our side. That I because you do look at her record on like cultural issues, which again you said is probably just a it's a very much uphill battle, if even winnable at all. Yeah, okay, I have no problem with that, but again, at the end of the day, it's like um, think I don't think there's been any explicitly like pro-immigration rulings, but again, just personal statements on it. But I do generally agree with what you said. With the past 50 years, it's just for the sake of the base. It's to rile them up. It's to get them out to vote because like you have a lot less than last time, but still there. The disgruntled Bernie Bros, the people who don't like Biden, saying, "Well, you know, Biden isn't great. He's a corporatist. He's a neoliberal. He's all these things that I don't like. He's a quote unquote center right, but Trump is very scary and he'll put a hard right judge on there. So we gotta vote for Biden to get another lukewarm
yeah,
judge. And I mean, keep in mind, just Bill Clinton, who was considered like the apex of centrism, was the one who put Ginsburg on the court. So it's not unimaginable that Biden would find somebody similar, or of course Biden's handlers would find somebody similar to nominate to that. So again, it's an issue that actually riles up both of them, but it's an issue I'd say the Republicans have a lot harder time with. That they're going to have a walk a much finer line with in order not to rile up the left. Because again, as much as I would love it if they put again Scalia 2.0 or somebody further to the right of that, it is probably going to lead to a backlash, especially with all the deliberation in the Senate and how long it would take to get the candidate actually nominated. Because of, I mean, I'm sure we all remember the last Supreme Court nomination, the entire Kavanaugh thing. They're already trying to do something similar, saying, "Oh, she's part of this secretive religious fundamental society that believes women should be in the kitchen." Blah 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 blah. Like
yeah.
again, and that goes back to the argument. It's like, well, next time if you nominate a woman, they can't do the Kavanaugh thing. It's like that's where you're wrong,
Is
buddy.
is, is it the People of Praise group, a
Yeah,
kind of interdenominational uh, group? It's been apparently blessed by the Pope and so on.
yeah,
I think Protestants, mainline Protestants like Lutherans and Anglicans can be in it as well. Well, I mean, really, how conservative are those churches? Let's
yeah.
be honest.
Um,
And you know, I mean, in this group, you can see in photos. There's, I mean, her sister also has two black children, right? So you can see that all the aspirations in America to climb to the top require for you to signal in some ways that you're not like an evil right wing white person, right? And you wonder if in the same way that, let's say, Antifa accounts on Twitter don't like you pointing out that they're not at odds with anything with the corporatists, like that. The main reason essentially is um, the main reason that there's a crackdown is it's just literally gone on too long. I mean, forget the fact that they're captured and released for months and months and months and months, right? Yeah, some of them have done some pretty bad things, and we don't know what's going to happen to them in terms of federal courts, but the vast majority are caught and released. So, anyways, that's the cultural climate that we're in, and I think she understands that, right? I don't want to be overly pessimistic or cynical, especially cynical, to say that she adopted those two Haitian children just to appease the libs. I think she believes that that is something in her faith that she ought to do,
Yeah,
right? But at the same time,
it's the overarching liberal narrative convincing it's like, well, if you don't adopt children from a third world country, how good of a person can you actually be, like sort of thing. And then,
yeah,
of
yeah.
course, once that happens, you have just all these blue check marks saying, well, that's actually a form of colonialism. This is like neocolonialism. This is just another form of white supremacy. Like, so again, it's damned if you do,
She
damned if
literally
you
makes the
don't.
black people do all the work around the house.
Oh no, that's horrible. That's just
The
I am calling the SPLC
Down
right now.
syndrome child, the Down syndrome child, it's only its only chore is to take out the garbage. Nobody else does it. So she's yeah, she's quite something. Yeah, so of course now the left has moved in a different direction, right? Where and I would kind of agree with them that, uh you would want black children to be in black homes because of, there's going to be identity crisis issues that will eventually emerge, right? It doesn't mean that the child is traumatized forever. And you also have to make the argument, like, well, where are the black people that should be adopting black children from Haiti? Or like,
Yeah, where's Obama's adopted kids? That's my question.
yeah, I know.
Well, it was
So,
Trayvon, of course. If he had a son, it'd be like Trayvon.
yeah,
That's a callback, but yeah.
yeah, it adopts a little Haitian child with a hoodie. So yeah, I don't have any great hopes that she's going to, reverse abortion, or maybe go down from 3 months to 7. um in pregnancy terms, right? So I don't, and I don't know how people get so excited about these things. Honestly, it's kind of like, remember when Trump got elected? There were all these great tweets, about they were making fun of what's her name, the woman on MSNBC News with the long neck, the lesbian.
Maddow.
Yeah, Maddow, right? Where she tweeted that her 8-year-old daughter asked what it would be like under Trump, and she had to explain to her that it was like kind of like being in the Roman Empire. Like that's like literally what she wrote. And so there were all these like ridiculous uh joke tweets, parody tweets that came out. One of my favorites was my 8-year-old nephew just came back from school, and he told me that they're reading Schmidt and Mishima. Oh my God, I don't know what to say. Hashtag Trump's America.
Yeah.
Right? I love that one,
I
and
mean, those
it's the
continue
same
to
kind
this
of thing,
day.
right?
Like
What's that?
those kind of things continue to this day with people being unironic about it, and then the people making fun of it. Yeah, but it's been a thing since like 2016. But continue.
Yeah, or people posting timelines about how Trump is exactly matching the timeline that Hitler was on. It's just, uh, it's annoying. You can still find a little bit of humor in it, but honestly, nothing's going to happen except there'll be some like wacko liberal tears. And then there'll be tears for the conservatives who will be very disappointed. Like the amount of hope, like they really do astonish me. In a way, they don't really realize what country they're living in.
Yeah, I do think on a subconscious level, plenty do, but they think,
Yes.
okay, this is our latch effort. If we can do this one thing, it might turn around just a little bit for us. And honestly, um, I don't think again, looking at the direction conservative appointed judges go, they usually settle into the dominant narrative. Again, like I've said, we saw that with Kavanaugh on several cases. We saw that with Gorsuch pretty recently, and
Yeah.
even Scalia back in the day would go leftward sometimes. So again, like you know, my perspective on it at least is with a Biden appointee, it'd be 100% bad. Whereas if with the Trump appointee, has a 5% chance of being decent. So that again, I'm not advising you to do either. Again, make your own decisions. I'm not here to give that kind of political analysis. But at the end of the day, I think again it goes back to that conservative mindset. It's like well, you know what? There's a very slight, minuscule chance it might turn out just okay for us.
Right, and that really is the best you can possibly hope for. Uh, if anything, this has kind of fired up the base. Although I see even that receding. The sorry, firing up the base for the libs, for the Dem supporters, and even that I see that receding for a while now. Uh, I would imagine that if there are going to be hearings, then we're going to see them fired up again. Or if it manages to quickly go through, and then they will rage, right? What this does to their, uh, their voting intentions, I don't know. I think a lot. I think a lot of them are actually going to be scared about mailing in and are going to be willing to get in line.
Yeah, and speaking of that, that leads me to the final point I want to make out of this. Honestly, there's a part of me that hopes that election night is a disaster, whether it is a electoral college tie or nobody wins the 270 votes, which whether that be by third party or there's actually very realistic maps. For example, if you were to just take the 2016 electoral map and flip Michigan and Pennsylvania blue, which again, that's not unrealistic, but keep Wisconsin red, you have a 269-269 tie, which would leave it to the House and then House and Senate to decide. Or if there's problem again with the mail-in ballots or suspicions of fraud, which we all know there's going to be, imagine that going to a split down the middle, 8 versus 8 Supreme Court. I mean, honestly, like I said, that would be insane. But part of me wants to see it just to expose just so it's a wake up call, so people can look at the system we really live in.
Yes.
But
Yes.
I suppose we'll have more information on the Supreme Court nomination as time goes on over the next month or so, and especially with the debates, which, like I said, it's going to be the focus of the first presidential debate, which will be occurring on September 29th. And like I said, we will make an episode focused on that later this week. But moving on to Belarus, and things have really heated up there to the point where
Yeah.
it looks like what we're having here is the full speed ahead. Well, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but a definite acceleration towards the Union state, and that has prompted, again, Macron to call Lukashenko to step down. Several countries recognizing the quote unquote legitimate president, the woman with the very Slavic names I cannot pronounce. You do
Tikhanovskaya.
Tihanovskaya. There we go.
Yeah.
And that leading to her being recognized as the legitimate president, sort of the Guaido of Europe, if you will. And things have really picked up the pace, and then that's on top of the absolute nothing that came out of the Navalny thing, with France and Germany still raising a bit of a stink about that. But apparently, Putin and Macron had a little bit of a heated phone call, which is a first for a while if you've been paying attention,
Yeah.
about the entire Navalny situation. And that phone call was leaked. Now, the legitimacy of that leak, who leaked it, how true the transcription was, I think that's all up for debate. But what we're seeing now is, and this will play into the Armenia issue, the Armenia Azerbaijan issue, which we're talking about, we're seeing the failure of the color revolution, if you will, in Belarus, to the point where Lukashenko, for the time being, has endured. He's moved close to Russia. He's given up on some of his lukewarm anti-Russian rhetoric he would pick up in order to try to squeeze out or extract a better deal. While these protests, they've seemed to have died down. They tried the all women, the women are the future sort of protests, and they've also tried this legitimate government exile thing. That's their newest thing. And they said
Yeah.
that their newest thing is that any deal Lukashenko would sign with Russia would be invalid because he isn't the legitimate president of Belarus. And again, is it going to
Which
give?
is kind of funny because apparently what I've been told is that uh, Lukashenko offered the EU to monitor the elections and they refused.
Yeah, and Lukashenko again. We go back to this
Like,
all the time.
and then after the results, he said, "Well, we could have another election in November," and they still refused.
Yeah, he played up
It's
to the
amazing how
West. He bought the American
the
gas. He played up to the EU, and they still want him out because that's not good enough.
Right, right. And he also set up an American embassy. First time.
Met with
So
Pompeo too.
yes, yes, and it's not enough. I mean, on some level, I can't really believe how stupid he is. Like, I don't know. Maybe he thought, like, maybe he wasn't confident in the election results, anyways, months and months before the election, and that's why he did all these, machinations, these geopolitical machinations to put pressure on Russia. But the truth is, really, like, this has never turned out very well for any leader that America has had a confrontational stance toward, or looked at unfavorably. I mean, the Western press for years has called him the dictator of Belarus. Not wrong necessarily, but um, they're not going to say those kinds of things about Saudi Arabia or Oman or United Arab Emirates and so on and so on, right?
Yeah,
I mean, so um, yeah, but yeah, they are putting pressure. The protests in themselves are still quite large, and they're still mostly filled with Belarusian offals. Uh,
yeah, yes. The the very privileged women of society who have again nothing better to do but to protest. The housewives of the, I would say, incompetent elite, and that's another thing. And again, you see this throughout the history of the entirety of feminism, and all the movements. It's just the disgruntled housewives of prominent men. But again,
yeah,
that's aside the point for this. But it seems like Lukashenko's elite, the elite of Belarus, and you usually see this when these sort of revolutions succeed. You look at Ukraine. You can even go back to communist Romania, back when Ceausescu fell. There's always a faction of the elite that stabs the dictator, the leader, whatever, in the back.
yeah.
It doesn't seem like that's happened in Belarus yet.
No, it hasn't, and you have to wonder about the money that's being pumped into these protests from vis-a-vis through Lithuania and Poland. Um, I guess another bit of news is uh, the Elise Palace has officially announced that President Macron will be holding a meeting with the president-elect of Belarus, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. So, like, what is he going to do? This is apparently going to take place in Vilnius, Lithuania. He's going to what? Inaugurate her? Like
It's not very Jupiterian
no
if you ask me.
inauguration. What's that?
It's not very Jupiterian of him if you ask me.
Yeah, yeah. This is lame. So yeah, he's sort of in the thick of it. You see him ever since Lebanon, uh, pushing himself out there in the news. You know, uh, uh, really performing the leadership role of Europe. Uh, Merkel is really, in a way, is nowhere to be found, and so he's taken on this position because I think the French definitely want some kind of independent Europe eventually. How that's going to happen, I don't know, but I do think that they're sincere about a separate European army, distinct from, but in cooperation with NATO.
Yeah, and
And I think
we'll
something.
actually get into that on either Wednesday or Thursday whenever we have
Okay,
that out
yeah,
because again, those maps I showed you that France and Germany still have plans to quote unquote disengage from the United States security apparatus, etc. Even if Biden wins.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, so there's still pressure on Belarus, but it seems that Lukashenko is just going to wait this out, and I guess you could add Putin to that as well. In winter, I would imagine the protests will be far smaller. The West will have to pump in much more money to keep them enthusiastic because they're not really willing to challenge authority, and they're not, and there's no mass exodus of military police or even military that are willing to challenge Lukashenko.
Yeah, and
So
it doesn't look like they're on the streets right now, but you also have to remember that a large contingent of the opposition to Lukashenko is much more pro-Russian than Lukashenko. Now, how much of a chance they would have to take power, I don't know, but they exist no
Yes.
less.
Yeah, that is true, and you know that is lost on Western media when they report it. You would think that every one of them want this like Belarusian radlib with these like sophisticated Soros-sponsored ads to take over Belarus and the Belarusian capital and kick out Lukashenko and send him on his way to Moscow. But that is true. That is true. And of course, we've already mentioned in past shows that um, Lukashenko in Russia is not very well liked. Uh, he's looked at very unfavorably, not so much for being a dictator necessarily, but not because he lacks innovation and he seems to be dumb and basically irritable. You know, um, but I think we should also stress that there is a process taking place now about a real unification between Russia and Belarus, and I would say strategically that has to happen. I don't know when that will happen, but I can tell you the consequences if it doesn't happen is that Russia loses this territory. Now, it was great as a buffer state, that's for sure. But the truth is, even though most Russians don't care, in fact, only 17% want Belarus to join Russia. The truth is that Russia needs Belarus as much as it needs Crimea for different reasons from a geopolitical standpoint.
Yeah, just for access to Kaliningrad alone, and that's one of many
Yes.
reasons. And I don't know, from what seemed like Belarus was going to flip in the Western column, surprisingly enough, it seemed to have worked out in Russia's favor again. Now, whether Putin had machinations behind closed doors, plotted the whole thing, or just played his cards right, it looks like, for the time being, barring any major event, unless Lukashenko gets overthrown in a palace coup or some of the elite turn on him or he gets stormed and gets the Ceausescu treatment where he's executed on live television, it looks like Belarus is slowly but surely moving towards integration with Russia and will be that way within the next decade. Belarus will cease to exist as a buffer state and just be part of Russia proper.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say before we move on to the next subject is the amount of economic dependence that Belarus has with respect to Russia. You know, makes you wonder kind of two things. One is if the West is successful, are they willing to really support this country? Just recently, Germany denied Ukraine a loan for 5 billion. Now, Ukraine, you can well imagine how difficult its economy has been to manage, let's say in the last 5, 6 years. But now, post COVID, right? And it doesn't matter whether most Ukrainians pay attention to COVID or not. The truth is, the countries around them do, and that has a negative economic effect, i.e., Sweden, as another example, right? So they're not willing to give them another loan. And I wonder if Belarusians are even just as naive as Ukrainians in this respect, because they are willing for for your country to literally become a basket case so that you move elsewhere in Europe. You know, they want you to anywhere from Portugal to Germany to Britain to France, anywhere but your own country. So, and I know for like perhaps young and ambitious people in Belarus, that's perfectly fine. But not everybody is going to get those dream jobs. Those are few and far between. And the fact is, like Ukrainians, you're going to end up doing manual labor jobs, like being a nanny in Poland or being a plumber somewhere.
Yeah. Um, and what you have there is even you have a lot of the ones who end up going into the blue collar jobs being migrant laborers, like Romanians are, like Poles and all these other Eastern Europeans are. But then you're also going to have the class that's educated or will be educated there that will become, again, something of a liberal elite, a problem that still exists in Russia, but it seems like with the constitutional amendment, they're actually finally addressing it. But again, you get that problem in Eastern Europe. I mean, I saw some article the other day about the Belarusian exiles in Poland, and they were up there with the
Ah,
weirdest Portland tier sort of
yes,
Antifa people that you like looked. It pretty much it was that, but not obese. That's the way I can describe it.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. That hits it right on the head. Wow. There's people. I saw a guy with some strange implant in his chest. Like, why? Yeah, you saw this. You saw the same basic freaks that we've been accustomed to in the West. Um, so, I don't. I mean, of course, I don't even understand like what the appeal is, but yeah, those guys make for great magazine covers, for slightly more edgy, artistic magazines, if you will.
Ah, yes. But with that out of the way, do you know what other Eastern European country is under a lot of pressure right now?
No.
Hungary. Radio Free
Oh yeah.
Europe has launched in Hungary, relaunched their operations in Hungary as quote unquote media censorship picks up in the country in order to give dissidents voices. And this is under Trump's State Department. This is under Pompeo's State Department. Allegedly, Hungary is this great nationalistic populist ally that we have in Europe that we want to emulate so much. Trump praises Orban for his immigration policy, etc., etc., etc. But while all this is happening, Congress and the State Department, and I imagine probably the CIA, now we had no way of knowing that for sure, but all of these different quote unquote deep state organizations, along with Congress, are working to undermine the current government of Hungary, a so called ally, a country that, surprisingly enough, even under Biden, would want to increase security ties but wants to maintain current security ties with the Trump administration. Now, we have all of that happening right now in Hungary.
Hmm.
And again, they've tried the mass protests against Orban. They tried them in the 2018 election. They tried it with trying to say, oh, Orban legalized pretty much slavery. He's working people to death. Look at these overtime laws. They've tried a lot of these things, and it doesn't seem like he budges. It doesn't seem like these protest movements pick up like even in places they do, like in Ukraine and Belarus. For whatever reason, he has weathered this, but it seems now we are dedicating resources to pumping what amounts to probably liberal paused propaganda into Hungary. Of course, it's going to be I I don't like they're going to ease their way into it. It's going to be simple criticisms of Orban, like oh he's too dictatorial, he's too censorious. He shuts down like media
Yeah.
outlets, whatever. And then it's going to go into he's too conservative. He puts too much emphasis on the traditional family unit. He should be more accepting of non-traditional families, like gay men raising children. Hungary should expand its laws on civil unions or whatever. Or isn't the prostitution industry and pornography industry in Budapest just wonderful because that is one of the biggest problems with Hungary right now, and probably my biggest criticism of Orban that hasn't been shut down yet. But it's going to just generally ease its way into just more degenerate, depraved criticisms and beaming that into Hungary. And again, how will Orban respond to this? Will he put his foot down and say and expel this subversive media organization, even at risk, even risking the wrath of the United States and the State Department? So this is a developing issue right now that could lead to a lot bigger consequences down the road right now because
Uh-huh.
so far I don't think for the rest of this year 2020 it's really going to make that much of a difference. I believe the next Hungarian elections are in 2022 or 2023. I don't remember whether they do every 4 or 5 years, but like I said, the last ones were in 2018. So those are going to be coming up, especially under Biden administration. It seems like Trump, with who has no control over his own State Department, the U.S. government is going to be working against Orban and his allies within the Hungarian government. So we're looking at, again, another potential color revolution in the making that actually, even on our side, isn't getting that much attention.
That's true. It has kind of flown under the radar. I mean, I remember, Radio Free Europe getting back in. I mean, I guess Hungary is a satellite of Russia, yet all over again. And in a way, Orban doesn't make it easy on himself because, of course, he came out last week saying that he would like to have the sanctions against Russia dropped and go back to closer ties. Of course, there's no way they're going to do that. This is literally forever. They want Crimea and probably a little bit more, and they're not going to release the sanctions. This is all or nothing. This is it. It's happening right now. Um, this kind of these kind of change in events, this extra pressure on Russia based on Rand Corporation suggestions, although they're not really unique. This is echoed throughout the Pentagon and other geopolitical strategists. You could see these machinations and suggestions at work just following the Atlantic Institute or any of these other think tanks, right? So, uh, you know, Belarus, lethal aid to Ukraine, uh, problems in the South Caucasus, arming jihadists in Syria. This is all part of the same thing. And, um, Orban might find himself kind of in no man's land because Poland is very quiet. Poland is not willing to back Orban on this. And
Yeah,
Poland
not to
is,
mention the Czech Republic and Slovakia both been quiet. The V4 countries are supposed to be this solid bloc within the European Union. It seems like Orban's the odd man out still.
yes. And this doesn't bode well. Like for all of us that would like Eastern Europe to be um, some kind of a last haven of Europeans that like haven't gone completely mad. Uh, this isn't good news. So I'm frankly surprised, and it's good that you bring this up. That other so-called Visegrad groups have been unusually quiet, not really supporting Orban very well. And that's not good because that's just going to add to pressure. That's creating a consensus
I mean,
against.
it is also interesting watching his most recent moves. I think it was a few weeks back where he pretty much gave us ultimatum to the European Union: increase funds or more deals with China will be made. To the point where he's really banking on Eastern partners such as Russia, such as China right now, despite
Yeah,
his playing coy with the Western powers still staying in the European Union. Again, he's probably, I would say, superior to Erdogan in terms of the tightrope act, and that's really impressive given Hungary's geography and its position being much less valuable than that of Turkey's. And it seems like, again, if there isn't some sort of easing up by the European Union, if there isn't some sort of um, easing up on the United States and the State Department, they're going to turn Hungary into an Eastern country. They're going to push them completely
yeah,
eastward. And who knows? It could result in them leaving the European Union and NATO altogether. Now, I doubt that would happen, but it it doesn't seem like they have the popular support to drive him out of office or drive him out of the country yet. And the more and more pressure they apply to him right now is just going to push him further and further away. When as they should be sweetening the pot, they should be turning a blind eye to his more quote unquote authoritarian practices right now. That would be the proper reaction in this situation. But
yeah,
it seems like it's an all or nothing thing. The fact that somebody like him is even in power at all in any country is just beyond the pale, absolutely unacceptable. And again, it's going to only serve to increase feelings of discontent between Hungary and the West. We all heard Orban's what was it? His Trianon speech that coincidentally enough he
mhm,
gave on D-Day, which again I also find very symbolic. And he just as much blamed the Western countries as the countries in the East, as he called it, and said Hungary is just this island in the middle of an ocean. It has very few friends and allies it can rely on, while also reaching out to the neighboring countries, the other Central and Eastern European countries. But again, Orban is really positioning himself. I think his moves have been very wise. I think, honestly, the foolishness comes from, again, mainly Brussels and Washington in this case.
yeah, and again, I agree, but I also have to return to the kind of pressure that's being exerted in Poland right now. Poland does. I don't think Poland is doing a Lukashenko. I think they think by siding on the side of the West with reference to Belarus that somehow they're going to be exempt from all the kinds of pressure that Hungary is under right now. In fact, they already are under that pressure. If they think that this is going to um, create some kind of a situation where the compromise can be met, they're in for a rude awakening, right? Like Poland is very much in danger of being like, I know they're a vassal, but they're not also completely subverted, right? And the pressure for them to be completely subverted, and this is everything having to do with like LGBT stuff to right of return of Jews and whose land claims and property have to be respected. And then there's substantial fears that once that happens, the slide towards the kind of Americanization of Poland, which will mean a more diverse population, a more culturally liberal population, will find its footing. And it doesn't seem to understand that it can't win this game. It's important, but it's not that important. Like ultimately, what they want, a subservient military that can pretend that it lives in a conservative country and that is willing to fight on behalf of the West and host its missile silos, basically, right? And what'll happen over time is they're just going to pause the Polish military, and they'll hate Russia for different reasons. They won't have to do with the Cold War era and World War II. It'll simply be because Russia is a synthesis of I don't know, everything from individualistic freedom and capitalism, or it'll be but it'll center mostly around LGBTQ rights.
Oh yeah,
Like
that's the
they're
new weapon
going to
going
get that
forward.
army eventually. Like it might take them 10, 15 years, but they're going to get it unless you stand in the way. And unless, things at home, well, I guess we'll talk about that on the next show, when things at home in the US get, crazier. Because I guess we should, as long as we're going to talk about like Eastern Europe, I guess, we mentioned earlier that France and Germany both see that eventually there has to be, it wouldn't be like, it's not a break with America, but it is a kind of independence from America, but not a hostile one, right? It's more about a kind of a self-determination, and it's really about coming out of that post-World War II era.
Yeah, being a
Now
partner
they
rather than a
see this,
vassal. Like,
right. Now they see that, and even a junior partner at that. Now they see this as an inevitability, but I guess so does Poland and Hungary, and maybe that's why they're playing this game. I just see these videos, honestly, of liberal Poles, and my God, I despise them as much as I despise the ones here. And I worry for them.
yeah, it seems
So
like Poland is um, really banking on something that is not that likely at all. That they can be the conservative bastion in a liberal empire, so long as Russia's on their doorstep and Russia is the main enemy. And again, Hungary, Orban have a bit more foresight than that, but again, we're also seeing the massive amounts of pressure coming down on them for that.
yeah, and you could well imagine the kind of leverage that Poland would have if it echoed what Orban is saying. My God, if that happens, this is a country that ostensibly hosts, you know, the latest or will host the latest American missiles. If they started, you know, not necessarily agreeing with Hungary all the time, but a few times echoing it, or you know, giving symbolic gestures that they agree with Hungary on lifting sanctions on Russia. If that happens, right, that throws a major monkey wrench.
Yeah, if Poland shows any sympathy towards the East, whether that be Russia, China, whatever, even Iran at that point, That's going to be when real panic mode kicks in because Hungary, as a symbolic, as a symbolic, I would say, head of this, is threatening because it serves as an inspiration. But if a country with the pull as Poland, with that uh, positions in hosting American weapons, being on the front lines with Russia, etc., that's when they're going to really start getting concerned. And that's all I had to say on
Yeah.
that front before we move into the probably biggest news of this week.
Oh, what's that?
Oh boy, the South Caucasus. Now, with the failure of, I would say, relative failure of the protests, coup in Belarus, however you want to term it, it seems like a fire has started on Russia's southern doorstep, and Armenia and Azerbaijan are fighting again. Let me pull up that map now. They did this in the summer when it was a minor border dispute that was over within days of both sides calling it a truce, but at this point, Azerbaijan has officially declared a state of war on Armenia over. I've heard the Armenians and Azerbaijanis call it different names, and just that province right there in the red you can see on the map. It goes by the I believe the Armenians call it the Artasks, whereas the uh, Azerbaijanis call it like the Kasha Tang. It's but again, that region right there in the red. Let's just avoid any
Yeah.
wars in the chat. Even though I have a feeling most of our chat probably leans one way on this conflict, as I do as well, and I'm sure you do as well. But it looks like they have really gone at it this time. The Azerbaijanis, they initially had a strong advance, but it seems like they're being halted by Armenian defenses. They've lost several tank columns. You've seen the videos out of there where the military performed despite superior equipment from the United States, from Israel, and even from Russia, because you forget, I mean, they're still a post Soviet state and still have some agreements with Russia. Now, again, they're much more Western aligned, recognize Israel, all that kind of stuff, Turkey, etc. And again, Turkey has pledged support for it. And we have, again, we're seeing a revival of what happened in the summer, of course, what happened 30 years ago upon the initial breakup of the
Yeah.
Soviet Union and the war over this region. Now, it seems like Russia has kept
Yep.
relatively quiet. They are sending cargo planes, which they cannot send through Georgia because of the United States.
Thanks, Slum.
Trump, in particular, put pressure on Georgia not to allow Russian cargo planes to pass through it. But I would say I'm a bit surprised by this in a way that Iran has taken Armenia's side on this. And I mean, Iran has a pretty sizable Azeri population. I know maybe not in practice, but on paper, Azerbaijan is a Shia Muslim country with, again, they're one of the more secular ones. So, but Iran has taken Armenia's side on this. Armenia has actually sent troops to assist Assad in Syria. Syria supports it. Obviously, Russia supports Armenia to a degree. They haven't gotten directly involved yet. The speculation is Russia will get directly involved if it goes beyond the disputed territory into Armenia's internationally recognized borders. That's when their defense treaty will be activated. But that's where it's laid out for now. But we have just
Yeah,
this.
and the historical
Go on.
Yeah, and the historical context to all of this is that war broke out between Armenia and Azerbaijan back in the early '90s, and that the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which is primarily Armenian anyways, was captured by the Armenians. The Azeris attempted to take it back, and Russia stepped in and basically helped them out in 1994, which is what stopped them from getting it. It's a kind of de facto non-state state that is sort of in Armenia, but not. Uh,
It
so
almost is, I would say, maybe not the best comparison, but the best comparison I can think of. Almost like a Kosovo situation.
yeah, very similar.
Yeah, and of course, Ukraine has thrown their support behind Azerbaijan, whereas you
Yeah,
see all these lines developing where like the Armenian volunteer fighters that went to Ukraine sided with the Donbass, sided with the pro-Russian forces, but there's also that undercurrent of like anti-Russian sentiment in Armenia, so it's
yeah,
probably one of the more convoluted conflicts we'll have to deal with going forward. But it looks like right now Azerbaijan's defense offensive have been repelled by Armenia. It looks like Russia has pledged some support and pledged to defend their internationally recognized territory. And again, Turkey has also thrown in it behind it. Greece, of course, with their mutual histories and mutual disdain for Turkey, has thrown support behind it. And France, continuing on with its rivalry with Turkey, has also pledged some degree of support to Armenia, which, again, is yet another place where French and Russian interests seem to align, as in with Libya, as in with some other conflicts in the Eastern Mediterranean, yet they're butting heads over Belarus. It is interesting to watch this happening because, again, Macron, who just recently put this pressure on Russia over Navalny, over Belarus, is now having no problem siding with Armenia, which, again, despite this being a really simplified, like, gross generalization, Armenia is in the pro-Russian camp.
Yeah, and not by a wide margin either, because they've had lots of protests, lots of Soros-sponsored protests. Basically saying Russia get out of Armenia, all that kind of stuff. The West has been trying to drag them away for some time. They've been successful to some degree, but in the end, Armenia knows that it would be completely obliterated if America became its protectorate. They would probably fare worse than Kurds. But to also add, because Turkey has become this kind of sort of sick man of Europe all over again, it's not finding a lot of friends. And one of the new enemies it has stirred is Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia has put sanctions on Turkey and has urged basically its businesses, including small businesses, not to trade with Turkey or face fines. That was an interesting development. I think Saudi Arabia is worried about Turkey becoming kind of the preeminent power of Sunni Islam in the world. I was talking about this in July, that's one of the things that Erdogan is going to push for, to get a wide base of support. And what he's done in Libya, he's now attempting to do in Armenia. So Syrian fighters have already left
Yep,
Idlib.
you just took my
Uh,
next point. I was going to say, if you want proof that this is serious, the mercenaries that have been fighting in Syria and to an extent Libya have been moved to Azerbaijan, which means this will be a longer lasting conflict. Even if it's a cold conflict, it'll still be, again, sort of like Libya, where maybe things draw to a stalemate, but they're still in a state of conflict that could reignite at any point. And yeah, the moving of fighters to Syria is interesting because you're going to get a lot of people, from what I've noticed, who champion the Syrian war, turn around and condemn this because, again, there's an interesting dynamic where a lot of Western countries are pro Azerbaijan and at least tacitly supporting them, including Israel, but there's going to be this undercurrent in a lot of Western countries where they'll go along with other Western narratives, such as anti Russia, such as anti Assad, but then have this 180 and say Armenia is where we decide to be sane and rational about this.
right, because they don't see the larger geopolitical picture, because they have their, whatever their morality glasses on, and they can't support Russia, but they can support Armenia, right? Because they don't really understand the alliances that are forming, and how even those alliances are often tenuous and contradictory. So this is a kind of a reductionist way of thinking in order to make sense of the situation. But yeah, with Syrian jihadis moving in, I would say that this is an attempt to make the war a much bigger problem, and particularly a bigger problem for Russia. Also, I would say this, that you saw in Bosnia a kind of change from a state that was largely secular Muslim to becoming more adherent and traditionally Muslim. And I would not doubt that this war is, in a way, to begin a kind of cultural change within Azerbaijan as a way of putting pressure both on Armenia and Russia,
And
and for
Iran.
getting
Don't let's not forget.
and Iran. Yes, yes, and also the Muslim populations within Russia, particularly the Chechens, another Caucasus-based group. So I would say that that's also a kind of a long-range goal.
Yeah, stirring up Muslims in the Caucasus to be a thorn in Russia's side is something we've seen for literal centuries at this point. As recently as
Yeah,
the 1990s, and I'm honestly like, I know this is probably a bit far off, and this probably won't happen. I'm honestly hoping it gets to the point where Azerbaijan penetrates Armenia proper, the internationally recognized borders, so Russia is within its rights to pretty much pull a Georgia in Azerbaijan and put it
yeah,
in its place. I think that's probably the cleanest resolution of this conflict for, again, an Azerbaijani advance, an Azeri advance more appropriately, into Armenia proper, get within a threatening distance of Yerevan, and let Russian troops flow in to Azerbaijan. Let it be a repeat of Georgia, where again they bitch slap them, they put them in their place, and there's again that semi-recognized autonomy of this disputed territory. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Azerbaijan knows better, but honestly, that's the cleanest solution I can see for this right now.
yeah. And also, there's a I think a frustration, with Azerbaijan, and it's not just simply the Armenia question, although the Armenia question is kind of like a scapegoat that's used every so often, not unlike Turkey's disputes with Greece. For 30 years, Azerbaijan was supposed to have built this tremendous pipeline from the Caspian across the Caucasus into the Black Sea and then into Europe proper. And that hasn't materialized. And I've literally listened to decades of this supposed plan that was supposed to pan out, and it hasn't happened. Also, this considerable amount of, let's say, um, some pro Russian sentiment in Azerbaijan. Um, so this is a difficult situation, and like I think most of the goals are cultural goals. I can't really predict exactly like how big this war is going to get. I'm going to guess it's going to be bigger than it was a few years ago, but it might just stop. The important thing will be to wrest um, Azerbaijan away from the Russian sphere in a more emphatic way, and the only way that can be accomplished is to make it more secular and less religious. We've seen this game plan as well. That goes back for decades. Um, but at the moment, the only helping hand that, in a direct way, that Azerbaijan is getting from Turkey, and of course, Eurasian LARPer Pakistan. I love that Pakistan is in on this too. Uh, but it remains to be seen whether America gets involved here or not. Um, yeah,
Well, I think
because
the question
it's
is,
kind of,
will Biden win the election? I think that's the answer to your question.
yeah, yeah.
Because, like, I'm not saying Trump wouldn't get involved at all, but it would probably be a much less degree than. I mean, again, we were talking about this the other day. Biden's foreign policy would be what amounts to revenge on Russia for quote unquote meddling in our elections, putting the orange fascists in power, which I thought was going to be in Belarus, probably still going to be in the Balkans, but it looks like the Caucasus throwing support behind Azerbaijan might just be the direction it's taken in. And especially somebody like a Susan Rice would do that. And honestly, the reason I find this conflict right here so pivotal, not to mention the Syrian fighters being moved in, but it serves geographically and in a, again, more abstract sense and a more geopolitical sense as a bridge between the Middle Eastern and Eastern European conflicts going on right now.
Hmm. That's a good point.
Because the Middle Eastern
Point.
conflicts, if you ignore it, it looks like again a lot of it is for Israel's benefit against Iran, against Syria, etc. But again, that also plays in the game of containing Russia. And then you look at the Eastern European conflicts. Again, it's more obvious that the game's containing Russia. But with this right here serving as, again, that both literal and metaphorical bridge between the two conflicts, I see this as very eye opening for a lot of people who may have not made that connection before. And honestly, it really just clicked for me the other day when I heard about this that, wow, this is really just conjoining these two hotbeds together, these two hotbeds of conflict together.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, the rim around this is that's being established. From Belarus to Poland to Ukraine to Caucasus to Syria is the rim is around Russia, right? That's the whole point of it. Part of it is there's been there's been people who've speculated about this, and it would clarify a lot of questions people have about Russian European relations, and that is integration of Russia into the EU. But I think for the West considers Russia far too strong right now to be included into the EU. That it must be broken down some way, whether that's physically in some ways, whether it's politically and economically more made less independent. That's the only way that can be incorporated, because of course it would benefit both sides if they became trading partners.
Yeah.
But the direction that things are going, that's not going to happen.
And again,
Especially with
in terms of that,
the redrawing of the constitution.
the reason why Russia could not be part of the European Union right now, is because you would have people like Zhirinovsky becoming MEPs and giving tirades on the floor of the European Parliament. Like, and not to mention the
Yeah,
massive
to
amount
say
of I mean, they would be the
of its
largest country in
military.
largest country in the European Union in both population and landmass, largest military power in the European Union, dwarfing France, Germany, etc. And again, they assuming, like, if it were a completely fair integration, Russia would have much more of a sway in the European Union than the European Union would have over Russia. Now, of course, if Russia would ever join the European Union under its current form, it would have to be with the demoralization and breakdown of several things, both economic, culturally, and militarily. But like I said, if some outlandish scenario happened where Russia were to join the European Union tomorrow, it would actually shift the European Union much, for lack of a better term, rightward than it would shift Russia leftward.
Right, right.
Even though another funny development of that is the like hard left, more like communist socialist movements in the European Union Parliament, like just those being co-opted by like a bunch of Russian nozzles. It's just a very funny scenario in my head, imagining if Russia were to be fully integrated tomorrow. And again, I know it's not going to happen, but it it definitely is a very it's an interesting, I don't know how you put it, thought experiment or thing to think about. But with that, again, it links all these together, and it shows that whatever hope for reconciliation there was with the West on Russia's part, or with Russia on the West's part, that ship has sailed. I would say it sailed after there was no real progress from the Trump-Putin 2018 summit, to the point where you're getting these fires in Russia's backyard, in the Caucasus, in Belarus, an escalation in Ukraine, or a possible escalation in Ukraine. Some of the deals within the Balkans currently, the expansion of the EU and NATO, and the desired expansion of that. I think that ship has sailed to the point where it's going to take a lot of work to get to the point where Russia and the West come to terms with each other, and there had to be a drastic change in either one or the other for that to ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose that's a wrap on that conflict. And one other conflict that plays into this is the broader. I just want to give a segment to this, the French Turkish rivalry. We're seeing this develop in Armenia as well. We're seeing France, again, the way I describe it, the two wannabe emperors, the wannabe Napoleon, the wannabe Sultan, going head to head yet again. And we'll get in the news about Libya, we'll get into the news about Syria, but I just think it's fascinating. Every move Turkey makes, or every move France makes, they're there to counter each other, to the point where what seemed like just an internal dispute within NATO, within the Western Bloc, if you will, has turned into what can only be described as a full-on rivalry. Like, I know on paper their diplomatic relations are probably very good in terms of economic relations, in terms of military cooperation relations, but it seems like as time goes on, and this would probably continue regardless of who the next U.S. president is, I think that has gone that far. Turkey and France can only be described as rivals or adversaries at this point.
Hmm.
And I'm really wondering what the apex of this is going to be because I keep on thinking, oh, it's peaked. It's either going to reconcile or go downhill or freeze out from here. But it seems like it escalates more and more. And funny enough, it seems to be Macron that's constantly countering Erdogan rather than the other way around. Whereas Erdogan will make threats towards Libya, Macron is in Libya defending Haftar. Uh, Erdogan will make threats
And
towards Greece.
so,
Yeah, Macron is there defending Greece and Bulgaria and pledging support to them from the European Union. Armenia, again, the most recent example of all of this. I mean, it's the and again Lebanon, which we'll also get into in a minute here. But I'm just wondering when Macron will finally turn over and take the pro-Assad position. It takes one Turkish push against the Syrian government for that to happen. Maybe a bit of a pipe dream, but it's gone a lot further than I thought, and we could see a reconciliation between Syria and its former colonial masters for all we know. The the, the
well, I mean,
I,
go ahead, go
I
ahead.
wouldn't go that far, but the machinations of just the beginning of this decade so far has created so many unbelievable things. Not that I think it would happen, but if it did happen, I honestly wouldn't be surprised.
Right. Two things. One is, I think a lot of this is symbolic of France. Not that that doesn't carry any weight whatsoever, but I do. Two, this is a very delicate time for Macron, and he's really walking on a very thin line in the sense that he wants to, basically ostracize Hezbollah, which has wide support both amongst Muslims and Christians in Lebanon, um, which really has a right to be there. So he wants them completely out of the picture. He wants to remake Lebanon, and I don't see him criticizing the Americans for new sanctions on Lebanon, a country that is hosting over 1.5 million Syrian refugees,
Yes, and
which is hosting at least almost 1 million Palestinian refugees for decade upon decade upon decade. So Lebanon is being is definitely being mistreated, and I understand what these machinations are about. They're about Israel and America, and this is why they want Hezbollah completely out of the picture in Lebanon. But at the same time, I think he figures like. Uh, he can also find maneuvers that help out his country in particular, with reference to Libya and Turkey. Uh, I don't know how much wiggle room he really has here. Uh, the Americans don't seem terribly upset that he is on the side of Greece, and in fact, really, America cannot be very vocal about this. It cannot risk it. It will make itself a pariah if it goes against Greece. Frankly speaking, because overall, I would say the Europeans are very much set against Turkey. They're fed
especially
up with
with
Turkey.
Trump's rhetoric, where he spent all of 2015, 2016 talking about how terrible the migrant crisis was, and then all of a sudden not siding with Greece or openly siding with Turkey. That would be like it would be not only a destruction of credibility for the United States in that regard, but for Trump in particular too.
Yeah, I mean, most Americans will just completely ignore this anyways, because for them, unless they're like highly educated and are fairly well off, they're most Americans aren't going to care. But there'll be some that do, and some yarn will be spun from it. But you're right, his credibility I mean, nobody's excited really about Trump the way they were, and that I don't think they're happy with the way he's handled Syria, uh, and nobody in America wants right now, at least on the ground level, the populace wants another war, and he knows that it has to be low level involvement, and in a way he has to give some sway to Macron here. But again, what can Macron really achieve in Libya? You know, on the one hand, he has his face set against Putin with regards to Belarus, and you know, in a more removed way with Lebanon vis-a-vis Hezbollah, who is an ally of Syria. In another, he wants to work with them in Libya to some degree. I mean, tacitly at least. So yeah, this is a very fine line that he's on, and part of that is just for bargaining, and it's might also be a reflection of the lack of power there.
Yeah,
I mean, all these nations lack a certain amount of power and authority, Russia included, and that's why they can be on different sides, so to speak. It's just Russia less so than France.
yeah, and again, it's going to be interesting to see at the end of the day which side Macron comes down on. Now, I have my own suspicions, but with all his will the rivalry with Turkey outweigh the rivalry with Russia is the question. Which horse will he bet on in that case? And I think it depends on, of course, who becomes president. Even though France again still has sort of charted the course for its independence, I think especially Biden in there would stifle that a bit. But again, it ultimately all comes down to that one question in France: which horse do they bet on between Russia and Turkey? Who is the bigger problem to them? Who is the bigger threat? And what's the bigger concern, whether that be Lebanon, Libya? I don't think Armenia will be in that question because that's, again, how new that is, but you never know how that's going to play out. But I suppose we move on to Libya proper in that case.
Okay.
So let's get the map up for that. And not much news out of Libya beyond the fact that in Berlin, there's going to be talks on October 5th with the various delegations, including Egyptian, Russian, French, I think Saudi, of course, Turkish. So it looks like we're getting a Syria style, like 2017, 2018 Syria style peace summit in Germany on the topic of Libya. And of course, this comes after Egyptian threats get involved a few weeks ago, things coming to a stalemate. The moving of fighters into Libya, the moving of Syrian fighters into Libya. Now, apparently, they're moving Syrian fighters into Syria as well. So it seems like Turkey is really disinvesting from Syria at this point, and I think we all know why. It's more or less a lost cause. Now, of course, there will be some resistance left there. They're not going to withdraw all their fighters. They're not going to give up completely on Syria for both symbolic and realistic reasons. But yeah, at the end of the day, the biggest news out of Libya is that quote unquote peace talks are awaiting in a week.
Yeah, it seems Egypt did the trick. So Sitra is still not under control of the Turkish-backed powers. That kind of showed you that it was maybe a bit of a paper tiger. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, and you can see that Turkey is kind of all over the map. Everything from oil and gas disputes with Cyprus and Greece in the Mediterranean, Syria, Armenia, Libya, and he's just moving these chess pieces all over the place. When he's got one that looks like it might be done for, then he just moves it somewhere else. Uh, I don't know, what the future of Libya is going to be if this stalemate continues, because ultimately what they want and what the people will eventually want is for the oil refineries to get back up and working. It's amazing to me how people are still even surviving there. You could have another crisis. I mean, it already is a crisis, but you could have a crisis the kind that we saw 9 years ago. In terms of a humanitarian crisis, there may not be the same amount of bullets flying, but a humanitarian crisis nonetheless. And a lot of this is really it's really up to Turkey, because nobody else is willing to side against Haftar, at least from the other major powers. They're not really willing to back the opposition to Haftar. It's been left to Turkey. I just wondered, like, how long can Turkey do this, right? Like, it has to be carrying water for other nations right now, particularly America, and
Oh yes,
particularly,
Germany and the UK as well.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
And what benefit is it going to really see? Like, like, I don't know. It almost seems like Erdogan's dream to leave a kind of a lasting positive memory of himself in office is coinciding with the wishes of U.S., UK, Germany, Israel.
yeah, and it seems like what he's become, rather than buffer state, Turkey has become almost, for lack of a better term, buffer empire, where it can project its power all across the region, in all its neighboring states, within reason, of course, without rocking the boat too much. And again, that is a good question. Erdogan does want this legacy, but how long until whoever comes after Erdogan wants something more, wants Turkey to actually be that neo-Ottoman state? And I think that's when things really start to get interesting with Turkey.
Yeah, that's a good question. What sort of leader will the U.S. want after Erdogan?
Yeah, because they've given them that taste of being an empire again, and it seems like they're loving it. Not only Erdogan, not only the political class, but even to the Turkish people. And like I said, how long are they going to be satisfied with just being the buffer empire, the empire within reason, within the goals of, again, that I suppose early on the show we called it axis of idiots. The the elites in Washington, London, Brussels, Tel Aviv, or Jerusalem, I suppose, etc. And yeah, that's where I think the future of Turkey will be determined on whether they get somebody who wants to revert back to the model that Ataturk set up, just being a secular republic, continue on with the semi-empire route, or somebody who wants to take Turkish power and influence seriously and establish Turkey as a more independent bloc on the world stage.
Mm.
I suppose that, on a semi-related topic, we can close out here with Syria. Let's find the key for
Yeah.
that. And again, not much out of Syria beyond, again, the advance towards Idlib is slowly but surely coming along. More clashes and fighting
Yeah.
in eastern Syria, as always, with the resurgence of ISIS out of nowhere. And again, U.S. troops still there, still being chased around their convoys, not doing much. And the Kurds in Turkey, of course, are having their squabbles, their back and forth, to the point where Syria has, again, become the frozen conflict. It's become one of the less active conflicts on the world stage. And imagine telling that to somebody 5 years ago at the height of ISIS, saying Libya is actually going to be more interesting in 2020. Armenia and Azerbaijan are going to be more interesting in 2020. Belarus is going to be more interesting in 2020. Our show, that originally started to cover primarily the Syrian war, has been relegated towards the end of the show. That should tell you all you need to know about it.
Right. But there are interesting developments. There was another terror attack in Afrin. It's believed to be from one of the Kurdish forces. I know that it could also be ISIS as well. Just as a side note, it's interesting that the more disinvested Erdogan is in Idlib, the more the resurgence of ISIS in central eastern Syria, around Deir ez-Zor and that whole Palermo complex, that sort of triad around there, south of the Euphrates, the more that has heated up. And we saw this trend developing back in late April, early May. Um, but the convoys with Turkish and Russian forces patrolling the M4 highway, they have stopped, and renewed bombing again this week by Russians in Idlib. So that seems to be heating up, and people have speculated that now. I mean, basically, what Idlib has shown is an inability of these groups to effectively work together against Syria. And I mean, that was always true to some extent during this entire conflict, but it's just as true now, even more so with reference to Idlib. And now it looks like this could be an opportunity for Syria and Russia to seize Idlib, to finally push them out,
I think
as it were.
especially with how many other fires are going on around the world, with the media spotlight taken off this, with the election in the United States, with the internal strife in the United States, such as the riots, the Black Lives Matter protests, all that kind of stuff, with what's happening in Libya, what's happening in the Caucasus, what's happening in East Asia with China, which again hasn't been enough to really cover in a show in a while, but again with again China ascendant power. If Russia and Syria can sweep this last remnant of rebel control away from Syria under the noses of the international media, the attention of the international community, there's no better time to do it than now.
Yeah, I would agree. And I understand that there's probably been agreements on Idlib between Turkey and Russia, anyways. That goes to explain the amount of outposts that Turkey has built, within Greater Idlib and just slightly outside of Greater Idlib, around that, demarcation zone where there's supposed to be, I think, 5 or 10 kilometers on either side. Uh, but a lot of these observation posts, really, when you look at footage, they're kind of like, I don't know, they're kind of like a gas station on a prairie road. Like, yeah, it's a building, but it's not like it's not a sophisticated complex,
Yeah,
right?
no
These are
sophisticated
cinder
drone
block.
surveillance technology, anything like that. It's just some guys with some rifles and body armor standing on the side of the road.
Yeah, and a building about the size of like I say, a gas station with a little auto body section as well. Not particularly huge or well defended, and they've been attacked repeatedly. And sometimes even by the very forces that they're backing. So I don't know. Is Erdogan going to leave Idlib? I would suggest that Idlib might have been a distraction and a way of sapping energy from Syria in order to stop some kind of cooperation between Syria, Russia, and the Kurds, right? Let's imagine if Idlib is taken away from Turkey, Mike. What do you have left? Well, you have that region that the U.S. controls in the east of the country, bordering Iraq, and it's not very small either. It's quite a substantial region. And then you have their stupid patrols that they have on the border with Iraq, on the northeastern tip of Syria near the Iraqi-Turkish border. So,
The precious oil fields.
these are the oil fields, yes. And so, what's left if that happens? Well, what's left is a conflict essentially between Kurds and Turks. And that would probably put more pressure on America to do something about it. Because now, you know, in a foregoing, that huge area that ISIS sometimes goes to in eastern Syria, that the Americans have controlled for, I don't know, for a very long time. Like what, what's left? And there would have to be a media blackout with reference to the Kurds. And if Biden is elected, pressure on him resolving the Kurdish Turkish conflict would have to be addressed. But how do you do that? By granting Kurds their own little semi-autonomous region in northern Syria, which, on the face of it, America is quite happy with, but is a problem for Turkey. And in a way, this is also why the Syrians and the Russians have have allowed that area to be overrun with the Turks, because it in a way it's not their fight. It is, of course, Syria's fight. I get it. That is Syrian land. But the fact of the matter on the ground is that is it's become a Turkish-Kurd conflict. And yes, I already know, that many Christians and Yazidis were forced out of there, as well as Muslim Arabs, and were forced out of there by the Kurds. I understand that, but it is what it is right now.
Yeah, and again, we're just seeing the unraveling of 70-year-old alliances happening right before our eyes in the case of Syria, and it's really fascinating that what should have been a quick regime change in the style of Iraq and the style of Libya. Not that the Iraq War was short, but the removal of Saddam Hussein, at that matter, was short within less than 3 months. Gaddafi was a very quick action where they took him out like that. Has gone into an almost decade-long cold conflict where this is the primary result of trying to overthrow some dictator in the Middle East.
Yeah, yeah, we're just 6 months away from the 1 year anniversary of that war, of the Syrian war.
Yeah, and yeah, like you said, we're close to the anniversary of the whole quote unquote
Then
U.S.
you're
withdrawal, the toleration of Turkey within northern Syria by Trump, allegedly, the way that played out. And for one final topic, I want to move on to Afghanistan and some of the news coming out of there. Now, there's speculation that Trump has given the order to withdraw all American forces from Afghanistan by the spring of next year. Now, of course, that would be contingent on elections. Biden could very easily undo that. Trump could very easily undo that. But I have my doubts that the story is even true. I think it's all speculation at best. But if it were to be true, even ignoring the factor of American mercenaries still being in the country, while I completely 100% support getting out of Afghanistan, just leaving that hellhole behind, leaving most of the hellholes we're in behind, it would be a very foreboding sign for the American empire that we gave up on something like Afghanistan, something we've poured so much resources in, something we've put so much importance in, and just picking up and abandoning it after 20 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I've often said, the day that America leaves Afghanistan is a day that it's definitely in a decline, because of its geostrategic position. But it may be too much to bear. It has served a very important place of observation of Russian machinations. And I'm very sure that Biden will look at this situation and find ways why that America should stay in Afghanistan. And I mean, in many ways, that the American public wants, even the left wants America to go back to being a nation instead of an empire. But it's not an easy thing to do. And I'm very sure Biden will scorn Trump, that the reason he's leaving is because of the
The Russian bounties.
the Russian bounties. Yes, exactly. Which is even on the face of it a ridiculous story. So I don't know. Long range picture, like, America doesn't realize yet that it's that it's no longer in a unipolar world, and it's still acting like it is. We'll see what it does. We'll see what it does, because it looks like it's not willing to really commit to leaving Central Asia and the Middle East. Probably because it knows it can't really counter China right now. And the allies that it would need to rely on, let's say India for one, are not, maybe are not the most effective. And the Philippines didn't even want to be, they had to be sort of wrestled back into supporting America in the South China Sea. So there's not a lot of takers. China's power projection in Asia is immense, and there's very few that are going to be willing to hop on board. And in a way, Australia is an important player, but it's a little geographically too out of the picture.
Yeah, and I think the ultimate point is, like you said, the day America leaves Afghanistan, the American Empire is either over or close to being over because, like I said, we've staked so much into that country, into driving out quote unquote terrorism or whatever, finding Bin Laden who was in Pakistan, uh, all these post hoc justifications they gave for the invasion of Afghanistan, and even the dubious start of it, and then the surveillance of Russia and China keeping that position in Central Asia. So if that's the case, expect soon to hear some announcement, some agreement we've made with Pakistan or India regarding
Yes,
Afghanistan.
exactly.
Or because I doubt Russia. Like you would think optimistically, Trump would hand it over to Russia. Well, number one, I would say Russia wouldn't be willing to take on that responsibility yet again.
No.
Number two, with the direction U.S.-Russian relations have went, that wouldn't be the case. Definitely not handing it over to China. So unless he handed it over to some Central Asian country, which is also unlikely, expect some sort of announcement out of Pakistan or India sometime soon, if that really is
Yeah.
the case, which, again, I doubt that's the case. I could see yet another withdrawal to the point where we have a residual amount of troops there, but I don't see a full withdrawal in the cards at all.
No, I don't, and I don't either. And I understand that similarly to China containment, this is also works the same way. This is why they need partnership with India and, as you say, with Pakistan to at least observe Afghanistan. And Russia, I think, after the disaster of the '80s, wants a very very small footprint in Afghanistan. Very very small. They're not going to be completely out of the picture,
Yeah,
but
their
they
primary goal is to stop the opium from flowing into Russia. That's Russia's stated goal on Afghanistan.
yes,
And I mean, which also we could see an interesting dynamic depending because the opium flows into Russia and then into further Eastern Europe and again Western Europe after that. So that's the main way it gets around. Whereas the American stuff comes mainly from Asia, particularly China, Vietnam. But a lot of the drug problems in Europe originate in Afghanistan, which again, that's another interesting topic of the Afghanistan war that is often overlooked, the opium trade. But
yeah,
yeah, if this is even true at all, which, like I said, I don't think it is, expect India or Pakistan to pick up a lot of relevance in the media sometime soon.
yeah. I mean, it's an election year, and even when it's not an election year, Trump has made these promises, and it's happened several times. So why should it be true now? I understand. Somebody could make the counter argument. Well, COVID, economic downturn, total, uncertainty and polarization in the U.S. as well. That's true.
Yeah,
That-
the region.
that-
I think one of the most realistic arguments is the region is too volatile even for us to handle. And that's not the responsibility we want to take on because, again, things have been in a lull in Afghanistan since 2015, but especially with the brewing conflicts around the world, like brewing conflicts in pretty much every country around Afghanistan, which is it's a bit ironic if you ask me. It could
yeah,
be wanting to pull out while you're ahead. And again, like I said, I don't think that's happening. And even if it does, the country's still going to be crawling with American mercenaries. But as I said before, the final point I will make about this is as much as I want this to happen, it's still a very
yeah,
foreboding sign for the world at large of things that are to come. So
yeah,
that's all I had
yeah.
for this week.
It's just too strong, even now, to leave Afghanistan. Um, but it is symbolic and not the least bit significant that this talk um, keeps happening. Like I say, these talks do have consequences. They are an indicator of other things, such as the culture at home and how the people feel there. They are war exhausted. No precedent since George Bush has ever run on a platform that hasn't promised reducing wars. None. No candidate, Democrat or Republican, has ever run without the fake promise of less wars. So
One exception, John McCain.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Bomb Iran. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even Romney, who was by all means hawkish, and you look at his previous positions, current positions, even he talked to, yeah, he did the typical Republican line at the time, was like, we're gonna go really hard in Afghanistan and then get out. Like it was one of those sort of um, promises. But that's all I had for this week.
Yeah. Thank you, cancer.
Oh no, oh no, it's been like 2 years since I think
Yeah, I
a
know.
little longer, but yeah, that it's strange because it feels like although he's gone, his legacy is far from gone. The fact that I don't know, it seems like his ideas have spread like this very hawkish idea, and
Yeah.
surprising enough, picked up by the Democrats. I guess that's the real way of honoring John McCain's legacy.
I know.
And who knows what next week will hold, but. Before we even get to that, we'll have the coverage of the debate. Now, of course, we won't be doing it live, but we'll be doing I suppose you could say, review of the debate, our thoughts on it, and we're going to record that on either Wednesday or Thursday. So keep your eye out for that. That should be interesting.
Yeah.
But we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
Take care, guys.